Welcome to the Women Veterans Alliance Wednesday webinar. I am Melissa Washington, the CEO and founder of Women Veterans Alliance, and we are a nationwide organization, and our primary focus is to connect women veterans with each other and resources. And one of the ways that we do that is through our Wednesday webinar series. If you haven't been to our website, which you probably had, to get registered for this event, we do offer business and career coaching. We also have the only online directory for women veteran-owned businesses. So if you're looking to do business with a woman veteran, feel free to visit our directory. And also, too, if you are a business owner, then we definitely want to look at getting listed in our directory. And we also have some great resources, the Allies directory, and a listing of women veteran memorials and monuments. And if you're interested in becoming a member today, information is on our website as well. So we've got coming up September 8th through the 10th. We're kind of on that countdown period where we are having, which will be our 7th Women Veterans Alliance Unconference. It's going to be an amazing weekend of pampering and inspiration and relaxing and laughing and healing and all those things, all in a fun weekend there, September 8th through the 10th. And more information can be found at womenveteransunconference.com. So for the rest of the month, we've got a couple, as you can see, our sessions that are lined up. August 23rd, we have Rochelle, who's going to talk about Slay to Success, how to confidently take bold risks after military service. And then rounding at the end of the month, we got Dominique, who's going to talk about freeing the mind and body from impacts of stress and trauma. So without further ado, I would like to introduce everyone to Dr. Antoinette, who is a U.S. veteran with nearly 30 years working in the areas of equity, human resources, logistics, and leadership development. In 2008, she launched an educational consulting company to share her diverse content and experiences. She holds numerous leadership roles, beginning in the Air Force, retired major, continuing as a senior manager in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, before working as a full-time faculty at the Office of Personnel Management's Federal Executive Institute, where she perfected the inclusion of creative arts-based learning techniques, art, dance, music, and poetry, into her design and delivery. She is an award-winning poet, sought-after international public speaker, trainer, certified life coach, writer, and workshop facilitator, known for her energy, storytelling, and facilitation of unique, passionate, thought-provoking topics. In 2020, she coined the term systemic forgiveness and plans to integrate this concept into mainstream leadership concepts. She considers herself a lifelong learner who completed a PhD in education, MS in behavioral science, a bachelor's in human resource development, and an associate's in logistics. With the life motto of keep moving forward, Dr. Allen seeks to connect her audience with the necessity of not only sharing their story, but making no apologies for it either. Her recently poetry book, Black Girl in the Mirror, is being used by multiple organizations to help teach leaders how to conduct challenging conversations while exploring women's leadership perspectives. So without further ado, Dr. Allen, I will let you take it from here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me. That's a really long bio. That's what I was thinking. And every time I hear people read my bio, I go, oh, I'm getting old. I just have done so many jobs and so many things, but grateful to be here with you today to talk with you about the power of systemic forgiveness. And so I always start each session with a poem. And so that is what my intention will be today, is to start with a piece of poetry. And so it's entitled Mother to Son by Langston Hughes. And it goes like this. Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it and splinters and boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor, bare. But all the time, I've still been climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on the steps because you finds it kind of hard. Don't you fall now. For I still going, honey. I still climbing And life for me ain't been no crystal stair. So over 100 years ago, we hear the great poet Langston Hughes picturing a mother passing on wisdom to her son. I love this poem for so many reasons, and I use it in a lot of places when I teach. But today, as I think about women and the role of how we have shaped the world and the tools that we have used that have been unique, this poem comes to mind for me. It is a picture of a mother passing on wisdom to her son. And some of that son, that son listening to his mother and gleaning what he will take for the next generation reminds me of the work of forgiveness. His mother is simply trying to tell him life is hard. And I don't know about you that are on this session today, but I absolutely footstamp that. Life is hard. It's really hard. I wish I had known how hard it was going to be when I started out years ago. But today, I want to share with you a tool that has been very useful and very helpful to me as I've dealt with various things in life. So who am I? Who am I? Oh, that's a loaded question. I'll tell you that currently I sit in between two different spaces. One is that of I am the director of the Grace E. Harris Leadership Institute at VCU. That's a new job. I started in January. I left the federal government after 30 years. I can't even believe that I'm saying I've done 30 years of anything. But took on this new journey, jumped into a little academic world where I could publish, my research and do some different things. But I am also the founder and the chief storyteller at the Leadership Institute of Forgiveness and Truth. That's my personal work. That's my passion work. It's the work I'll do forever. Now, I start with this image here. This is a book cover of a book that I was supposed to write. I thought I was going to publish it in 2020, but you all remember 2020, right? Oh, what a difficult year. So it didn't happen. And I put this cover up because it's still on my to-do list. But this is the way I've been sharing this work for well over 5 years now. So we'll talk about this power of systemic forgiveness. I always like to give a bottom line up front. The Air Force sent me to a briefing class many years ago, and they told us if you're going to be teaching people, give them the bottom line up front. Give them something at the beginning of the session that they can hang, their hat on. And so this is my bottom line up front for you during this session. There are women waiting for you. That was 6 words that saved my life many years ago. So I told you in the beginning, life was been kind of hard, right? And so about 10 years ago, life kind of fell off the rails for me. Life fell apart, if I can be very transparent with you. I had personal adversity in one hand, professional adversity in the other hand, and I was in a key executive level leadership position. I didn't have time for life to fall apart, and I was also finishing up a PhD. So not a good time for stuff to kind of come off the tracks, but trouble doesn't care. And so from that experience, everything I do today, all the work that I do around forgiveness, around healing, working with women, all of that comes from that moment of life falling apart. And these 6 words are the words that kept me here, if I'm being very honest with you today. There are women waiting for you. That was a strong feeling that I had as I was going through my trials, my tribulations, and totally not knowing what I could possibly do to get up from this horrible, fall that I was taking. And I realized in that moment that it was bigger than me, that it wasn't even really about me. It was about what was I going to do with that experience. And so I fully believed that there were women waiting for me, that there were women that once I was healed, I would be able to share my experience and my story, and it might help one person. But if you had told me all those years ago that everything that I was going through would end up in the picture on the right, where that I am engaged with audiences and talking to women, random women who just kind of come up and say, wow, you don't know what that meant for me. I would have gotten to the healing much sooner, and I would have embraced forgiveness much earlier. But that hindsight is always 2020. But the woman I was is the picture on the left when I was in the military and I was leading and I was doing all of these things and I was focused on a mission. And I just pushed down a lot of troubles. I pushed down a lot of things that I should have gotten help for much earlier because I was in the military. And, they told us, hey, keep moving forward, just keep pressing on, it'll be okay. But one day it wasn't okay. And I had to come to terms with that. So I say to you at the beginning of the session, I fully believe that there are women waiting for you. They're waiting for you to share your stories. They're waiting for you to be healed. They're waiting for you to embrace forgiveness so that you can show them how to embrace it when they face difficulties in life. So 6 words. If you're taking any notes, please feel free to jot that down. Now, let me tell you how I got to this work, because that's always important. People kind of go, how did you start teaching forgiveness? I mean, I teach forgiveness in federal spaces. I go in and do leadership development with executive level leaders, aspiring leaders, anyone who will listen, and I teach them about creating cultures of forgiveness. So sometimes people wonder, how'd you get to this work? Well, I finished up a PhD in 2017, and out of my doctoral studies came this remarkable leadership strategy of forgiveness. So I interviewed senior Black women leaders in the federal government, and I wanted to tell their stories of resilience. I figured they've probably been through a few things, in their experience as they were climbing up to get to the top, of their organizations. I was not prepared for them telling me that they used forgiveness as a leadership strategy. That blew my mind. I mean, I have heard leaders use a lot of F words, but not forgiveness. That is not one of the words that I typically heard from leaders. And yet these women were telling me, no, I use forgiveness. I use forgiveness because it was taught to me, because it was modeled for me in my childhood. And the last woman shared, she said, Antoinette, it's my leadership strategy. And I went, wow, I've got to really consider the benefits of that and share it as best I can. And that's what I've been doing since 2017. It was the key finding in my research of how these women were able to move past their adversity and their trials, if you will. So these women, and I use Sarah. Sarah is a piece of artwork that I use to be able to wrap all the women together in one picture for you. So in order to tell these women's stories, I used music, art, poetry, anything I could do to creatively paint a picture of them. And so Sarah became the image to represent all of them. So Sarah is a woman who had struggled with colorism, so discrimination based on the skin tone of her skin, racism, and sexism, right? That intersection of being women of color and also dealing with issues based upon her gender as well. Sarah was interesting because she was so much like so many other women that I had met throughout my time in the military and in the federal government. She owned her personal identity, meaning that she kind of knew who she was, but she did not own her corporate narrative or identity. People were still telling Sarah who she should be, how she should show up in the agency so that she could be promoted, how she could move forward. And this was a constant struggle. I asked Sarah, what is your advice for the next generation of leaders who will come and take your place? And that's what you see on the outside of this picture. She said, hey, you need to create a network and create it soon. You're not going to do well if you just operate all by yourself. You have to have other people working with you. She also talked about that you needed to believe in yourself. In particular, she said you might be the only person who believes in yourself at a moment, and that's fine. You are enough. And then she said, seek opportunities. None of the women that I interviewed ever saw themselves as leaders. It was interesting. They said, actually, it was someone else who said, I see leadership potential in you. I think you should put in for this position. Sarah never saw herself leading. Interesting. And then lastly, my favorite piece of advice from these women was to go beyond me. They didn't want the next generation to look at their success and to put a pin or draw a line in the sand. They wanted that next generation to go even further. So I always give honor to Sarah in these sessions as I talk about this work of forgiveness, because without Sarah, I'm not sure how long it would have taken me to think about forgiveness as a leadership strategy. Now, when I talk about systemic forgiveness, I did coin this term in 2020. 2020 was a very difficult year. You all are survivors. I mean, that is exactly who we are. We survived a global pandemic, and we are going to feel the effects of this one event, this one global pandemic throughout our lifetime. This is what we know. If we look back through history and we looked at the science and the experiences of the people who survived the 1918, pandemic, it shaped life, and it's still shaping life for us. But in 2020, I was already knee deep in the work of forgiveness. By that point, I had already trained well over 1,000 leaders and, was taking in feedback and revising curriculum and all of these great things. And I was so excited. And then 2020 hit. And I started looking at the social unrest in the country. And I just went, wow, this is a moment where we definitely need forgiveness, but how do I package this to help people to understand the necessity when the emotions are so high? And so I really began to reframe the work. When I first started this, I was calling it strategic forgiveness because that's what Sarah told me. It was to forgive up front. It was to know that you're going to have to forgive. But this was a little bit deeper. I needed people to understand that it was deeper than just strategic. That was the first step. It was not the only step. And so then came systemic forgiveness. So it's a busy slide, but here's what I need you to know. Systemic is an acronym, and you can see what it means and how I use it. But the word systemic means to affect the entirety of a thing. And that is what I'm talking to you when I talk to you about forgiveness, that forgiveness would impact all of you, your whole being, your mind, your body, your soul, your spirit, however you come to those terms, that it would impact organizations, it would impact your community, your family, all the spaces where you connect to. It is strategic. So it is about doing that work up front. It is to be able to yield. You might have to sacrifice or give up something to meet this goal of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not a one and done, which is why all of us who are probably on this session have attempted to forgive something that we're probably still struggling with, because it's not easy work. It's not just I wake up tomorrow and I go, I forgive you. And then it's all butterflies and, no, 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 no. It's not that at all. It is simple, however. The mindset is simple. It is to say, this is what I will do for myself and others, because forgiveness sets you free. It's not even about other people, it's about you. You're the person who's impacted when you don't forgive. It's your blood pressure that's affected. It's your sleep that's disrupted. It's your emotions that keep you hostage. It's all about you. So it's a simple mindset of I will forgive no matter how hard it is, no matter how many times I have to try and do it again. It's a simple mindset. You're going to have to be unrelenting, which is tenacious. It is to continue to press forward to your goal, to get up and do it again. It is eccentric. People are going to look at you and they're going to go, why would you choose to do that? Actually, the research tells us that one of the biggest barriers to choosing forgiveness is family members and loved ones, because they think you should still be angry about what happened 30 years ago. You should always be angry about that. No, no, it's impacting you. So it makes you eccentric. You will stand out. It is a large gesture, and that's why I use magnanimous. It is a big gesture to forgive something. You could spend your entire life being stuck in the past. And now I know many people who have. Or you could make this really large gesture and see it as an investment in yourself. It's intriguing. So when you start to think about it, I tell you, you have to get curious instead of critiquing it. You want to get curious and say, how could I do this? Why should I do this? And when should I do it? And get creative. Use whatever you need to do. Look for ways to explore this forgiveness. Listen to other people's stories. How did they do it? There are plenty of examples of people who have done this long before you and I have ever tried to do it. And so this is where the creativity piece comes in. You're going to have to be imaginative and think about ways that would work for you. Now, I love when I'm teaching this, I usually will use a, ocean backdrop, because one of the ways that I learned to forgive is I would go to the water. I would sit at the beach and come up with the most, like, weird, odd ideas of how I might forgive and what methods would work for me. So water might work for you. That might be your happy creative space. It's certainly mine, and it is the place that I will return over and over again. So this is the systemic nature when I talk about forgiveness. It is all encompassing, and it is work that you will have to make an investment to be able to do. So when we look at this, as I said, there are many, many women who have tried to accomplish this long before we have. Warrior women, if you will. And so this is an image of Mulan. Now, many of you know the Disney version of Mulan. If we look throughout history, there are many versions of this woman. Some of them are myth, some of them are legend. And so historians really don't know the accuracy of this woman's story. But what we do know here is a great quote that accompanies the story is the practice of forgiveness is our most important contribution to the healing of the world. The practice. If you're going to get good at anything, it requires practice. And in the story of Mulan, you will find, if you go and look at it through a different lens, this is a story of forgiveness. This woman's story is to be able to figure out how to forgive many of the atrocities that she's seeing committed in her culture and in her life. So it is all about practice as well. Many ways that I share with people to think through the whys of forgiveness. Why forgive is really your first step. If you can't give yourself a good, legitimate why you should forgive, it'll be very difficult for you to figure out the how. And so the first place I start is there are many ways of why we should forgive. And I start here. There is what I call the spiritual requirement. Now, I am not proselytizing. I'm not preaching to you today, and I will not be asking for an offering. Okay. What I am saying to you is, though, that throughout history, there has always been the practice of forgiveness. Every major world religion suggests forgiveness, every single one of them. So in my research, I had to look at the spiritual requirement because one of the women, as my research study, this was the reason she chose forgiveness. It was a spiritual requirement. And she said, Antoinette, my faith tells me I have to forgive. So I just figured I better figure out how to do it. It was a spiritual requirement. And it would be disingenuous for me to teach anybody about forgiveness and try to cut out faith, because many people come to this work through faith, right? So I point out a few of these for the sake of the imagery. And so my favorite when we think about the imagery is the Buddha. Now, the Buddha says holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else, but you're the person who gets burned because you're holding the hot coal. That's what unforgiveness is. It's holding on to the offense, the anger, the sadness, the resentment, whatever it is, thinking that it'll hurt other people, but all the while it's burning you, right? So that is a super visual of why we should resist unforgiveness. So, pick one. I say however it lands for you. Some of you will go, yep, that's mine right there. However, and wherever you come by it, it's up to you. If you are a person who's an atheist, I would encourage you to look at the work of Dolph Lundgren. And some of you are going, Dolph Lundgren? Yeah, Rocky. He was the big Russian fighter in the movie Rocky. He has a fabulous TED Talk about forgiveness. It's called On Healing and Forgiveness. And he tells his story, just his story of how he came to the work of forgiveness. So you can look at the spiritual requirement and go, yep, that's me. Or you can say, nope, I need another example. And I will give you the work of Dolph Lundgren. It's a fabulous, 14-minute TEDx to tell you how he came to the work and what it has caused him to start doing once he did his own forgiveness. Because forgiveness, once you move past your healing, you'll be energized to heal others. So I told you about the spiritual component. I want to hit the body. There's a great book, write this down. The Body Keeps the Score. If you Google that, you'll come up with this wonderful book. And in this book, the leading trauma expert in the world talks about how trauma gets trapped in your body, right? And your body is who keeps the score. So you could have a traumatic event without any physical harm, but your body can start to fail from that's lodged inside of your body. That's why forgiveness is important when we start to think through the healing process, because your body does keep the score, and you have to have a way to move negative emotions outside of you. So I'll give you two women as examples here when we think about forgiveness. The way that I teach forgiveness is through three ways: forgiving yourself, forgiving others, and forgiving systems. And I do a bulk of my work with systems because people don't think about the system. They go, oh, it's Sergeant such and such that I'm still mad at from basic training, right? Okay, but there is a system as well. And sometimes forgiving that system is what the barrier is for you. So the military is a system, the federal government is a system, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, the Coast Guard, the Army, those are systems. And while there are people who work in those systems, there are still systems in place that may have harmed you throughout your time. And so when we think of self, that's the hardest person to forgive, is yourself. That is the work. I always tell people, you could have harm in the other areas, start with yourself, because there's typically, for most people, and especially with women, we do a lot of self-blame. Even when it's the other person was clearly the perpetrator of this harmful thing, we somehow look and turn the mirror to ourselves, trying to place blame on us. And so my definition of the systemic forgiveness is it's your capacity to leverage forgiveness as an intrapersonal system, which is inside of you, to move closer to getting tranquility and harmony with interpersonal groups and systems. That's you and other people, right? So when we look at the work of Frida Kahlo, some of you may be familiar with Frida, brilliant artist. She put, women artists on the map in the early 20s, 40s. I think it was the 1940s. She's a Mexican artist, and she gets international attention. Her artwork it's different. It's abstract. It is not the norm for what women are supposed to be doing. Rarely was their artwork noticed, and yet here's Frida showing her authentic self. I love this portrait because this image, to me, it's Frida's way of talking about she had to cut her own heart out. That's what you see happening in this picture. In order for her to move past the traditional Mexican cultural standard of the woman that she should have been, she literally shows images of cutting like her heart out to be authentically seen as who she is. There was quite a bit of forgiveness of self that had to go in there, of letting the family down, of you should traditionally just, take a husband and have children and work in the home. And here Frida is internationally known as a woman artist traveling all around the world. That is not the norm. And so this is the forgiveness of self. When we look at systems, I've put here another woman, Eva Core. You can find her story if you'll Google her. Now, Eva is a fascinating woman when you think about forgiving systems. So Eva she was a set of twins, and during the Holocaust, she was abused by Dr. Mengele. And many of you, I'm sure, have heard of the stories of how he, performed experiments, horrific experiments on twins and many children during the Holocaust. And so Eva's response to this system, because this is a system of oppression that she's facing, Her response was to engage in forgiveness. And she spent her life learning to forgive and offering that forgiveness to other people. She actually created an institute in which they talked about the necessity of forgiveness. It's called Candles, and this was in honor of Holocaust victims and survivors. So we are not the first people to be attempting to think about this forgiveness in this manner. And but I'll spend a little time talking to you in each area because I'm not sure who is, who immediately has written down, oh, it's a system I need to work on, or oh, it's a self issue, or others. Now, here's what I want you to do. This is where we're going to engage a little bit. You can cut on your camera if you like. We're a small group, which is my favorite group to work with. You can cut on your camera, or, you don't have to, but I would like for you to engage with me in the chat or either come off of mute. So I want you to think about a time when you needed forgiveness. Now, that could be you needed someone to forgive you, or you needed to offer someone else forgiveness, whatever comes to mind for you. I want to know what emotion is tied to that memory. Is it anger? Is it sadness? Is it fear? Is it disgust? What is the emotion? And then I want you to think about the size. So I want you to imagine that emotion was a rock. And if it was a rock, how big was the rock? How heavy was the rock, right? Let me know about the rock. And then that last question is, how long have you been carrying that weight? Okay. So 3 questions. You can connect with me however, works best for you. Chat box is fine, or come off of mute. Just curious. So when you have it, let me know. Oh, okay. Thank you. Yamel, it's a giant steel wall. Okay, Bernice. Yes, I see that. Anger is the emotion. Okay. All right. Very good. Now, large. Okay. All right. So how long have you been carrying that weight? So if each of you all just kind of let me know. How long? A year, 10 years? I think the highest number I got was like 35 years. I mean, okay, so 12. Okay. Okay. 25. Okay, good. All right. So, um, this is what I find in every session I do. We've got work to do because we don't want you. I asked you to think about a time, the emotion, and how long have you been carrying it? Okay. So my goal is that we leave here today a little bit lighter. That's the intent of the session, is that we get some practical tips and tools, some things that we can do so that we can lighten your load. Okay. So let's move forward with that. In that 25 years, in that 12 years, there is a timestamp, if you will, something that is tying your feet to that event. That's what you want to be figuring out, is why am I still carrying that weight? My secondary question is always, how long do you intend to carry that weight? I don't want you leaving here today carrying it for another 25 years. So we've got to think through, what do we do? So here's a model I created to help people to really to give you a quick model. There are lots of models of how to forgive. This is mine. It's the WTF model. Now, we know what WTF stands for, but this is my WTF. And it's for all those moments where you're just sitting back going, what? Like what? Why? How? I used this model to help move myself. And this is what I call, there are 2 cycles when we think about those moments in time. We have what is known as we have a rumination cycle. That's the 25 years to 12 years, where we just keep the same story going. Typically, we complain about this thing that happened. Then we move into obsessing a little bit, like, I can't believe it. I'm going to keep thinking about it. I'm going to keep the same story. And then we move to blame. It's your fault. It's my fault. We're looking for villains in the story. That's rumination. That's a negative cycle where you just do the same thing over and over. You can think of the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over, right? But never going to get a different result. What I want to pull you to is what I call my reflection cycle. My cycle. That's my WTF model. Write, think, forgive. And you're going to do that over and over and over. One of the most important things for me, the most helpful things that I did was I wrote. And I am a person of words. I'm a speaker. I always have a word, but I can tell you that that was a period where I had no words. Not that I could speak. I was just too damaged. That's the truth. I was heartbroken. It was the first time I could never paint a positive outcome or future for me. And so this became the ink, of your soul is what I started to help people and myself to think about. I had so much that needed to come out of me. The only way I could get it out was to write it. And so that can be journaling, and plenty of people offer people journaling. Journaling is so helpful because you have to have a way to move the emotions outside of you. You could write a letter. Now, I started with journaling, but I'll tell you where I ended up. It was letters. I wrote many, many, many letters to people, letters of forgiveness, letters of inspiration. The only way that I could still imagine like being good and being connected to a community, to other people, was to write these letters of encouragement. And it sounds absolutely crazy, but for 1 year, I wrote a random letter to a woman in every state in America. I just randomly looked up Idaho. Oh, Sally Johnson. Okay. And I wrote a letter of encouragement. Just, hey, somebody's thinking about you. It was the most helpful thing. It's the way that I stayed connected to people. I wrote, and then I thought. And thinking is a practice. You have to have time in your life where you can actually think. So I would write, and then I would think about what I wrote and what I was feeling and what I could possibly do in this moment. And then I made the conscious decision to forgive. I'm going to forgive. And then I did it over and over and over again, because it's the same cycle of moving through your mind, of things happening. How do I move past this 25 years? How do I move past this 12 years? I wrote, I thought, and I forgave. And I did it again and again and again. And I will tell you, it got easier. It's like riding a bike, because immediately when that offense would come to my mind, I had a process to deal with it. I said, okay, well, let me write about that. How does it make me feel? And then I would think about it. And then I say, no matter how I feel in this moment, I've already chosen to forgive. Okay. I have to bring up pain at this point. How do you approach pain? There are two paths when we think about pain. There is the path of the healer, and then there's the way of the warrior. And I know that we have warriors here. I already know that we have warriors. As women veterans, we are warriors. What I will say to you respectfully is, inside of you is a healer. We are born as healers. That's the truth. I want you to think to little children now. If you're having a bad day and you come in, very little children, their whole intent is to make you feel better. Are you okay? Can I draw a picture for you? Do you want a hug? We are healers. We're born into this world as healers. What I help people to do through my work is to blend the healing part of us and the warrior part of us. It's not an either or, it's a yes and. You have the capacity to be both. And it's your civic responsibility, I would say, to figure out in any given situation, how do people need you to show up? So as a leader, I had to think. Sometimes I would go in and say, I think they need a warrior. I was actually hired for jobs because they said, oh, you're a warrior and we need a warrior. And what I found out was people really needed a healer. And they needed to see that healing side of me. So your approach to pain is very important when we start to think about how you move forward and how you choose to forgive. So the warrior can forgive and the healer can forgive as well. The best of both worlds. Warriors are taught to endure pain. Healers are taught to alleviate it. This is the truth. Now, the first part of this quote, I wish I could say, oh, that was mine, but actually, I got that quote off of Vampire Diaries. During the pandemic, my oldest daughter and I, we were binge watching Vampire Diaries, and lo and behold, here comes the oldest vampire on the show, and he says, "Warriors are taught to endure pain." And I thought, isn't that interesting? As I'm doing this work, and then I added, the healers are taught to alleviate it. That's the work, and start with you to alleviate. Now we're going to shift quickly to forgiving others. This is where people have spent the bulk of their focus. If you've probably done any sort of work around forgiveness, typically people talk about forgiving others. So we know a lot about that. Now, Abraham Lincoln has this interesting quote. I don't like that man. I must get to know him better. I love this quote. I absolutely love this quote. We need to think about that as a framework as we're engaging in how we intersect with other people. Why might they have done what they did? Sometimes we don't know. But if we get to know them a little bit better, then we can begin to understand what motivates a person. And sometimes you'll be surprised by what you find. This is where that age-old adage of healing people, hurting people, hurt other people, this goes in this category. Understanding other people's stories can help us to understand better how to forgive them. What would have caused a person to show up with the behavior that they did? Doesn't excuse the harm. We're never looking to excuse it. We're looking to learn how to forgive it. So here's a concept of social pain. This was another work that kind of came up. I've done quite a bit of work in the area of, um, diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity, whatever people want to call it. I mean, I know it's touchy. People want to cancel terms and all of this. The work has never stopped. It's not what we call it. It's the work. The work will never end because we've been doing this work as long as there have been human beings on the earth. But there's this concept of social pain, and it is essentially the pain of exclusion. And I have the historical, image here for you. And if you like, if you're interested in like history, you could Google this story. It's a very fascinating. This is a picture of Wilson, Charlie, Rebecca, and Rosa, and they were slaves during the 1800s, and they were all in New Orleans. And most people are like shocked when they see the images. It's like, those three children were slaves. Absolutely, they were slaves. In the North, they wanted to raise money to teach slaves to read after the Emancipation Proclamation, after slavery was abolished in the United States. So they began this propaganda campaign, right? And they put these pictures, this New York photographer took the pictures and he paraded the kids all around New York. They put American flags behind them to show that they were the face of slavery. Because what they knew was people attributed the face of slavery to Wilson, which is the clearly African American man in this image. So people knew, like, that's the face of slavery, right? They understood that exclusion. They did not understand the faces of these children. And it was intentional to use children because Northern mothers were so sympathetic after seeing these children who looked a lot like their children that they raised quite a bit of money. It was a very successful campaign. But this is about the pain of exclusion. And every one of us knows what it feels like to be excluded. If you're a woman veteran, many of you probably worked in professions or worked in sections where you were one of one or one of two. And at times it could have been a very isolating experience. That was the bulk of my Air Force career, was I was typically one of, a woman officer, and definitely as a woman of color. That was absolutely my experience. And so this exclusion has been one area in which I've done quite a bit of work to understand forgiveness, right? As I sought to forgive others. And I could tell you, 100 stories of this social pain that I experienced throughout my 21 years in the military. I am too young to have the story of being refused food in a restaurant in a military uniform, but yet I have that as one of my exclusionary stories. And so this is one of my favorite quotes as well. This is John Little, who was a fugitive slave. He said, "'Tisn't he who has stood and looked on that can tell you what slavery is. Tis he who has endured." And so remember, my bottom line up front is that there are women waiting for you. It's not women who are conducting research that can tell other women how to heal from those things. It's women who have done the healing, who have already experienced those things, who have firsthand experience of what it is to be a woman veteran that can help other women in uniform to heal. So all of us can assist with this. There is a price when we start to think about how to do this work and how can we start forgiving, especially in the realm of others. Here's what I know. There's a price for peace. Amazon doesn't sell it because I have been looking for it. It's on back order, apparently. But the way in which you could gain peace today is 3 ways I offer to you to think about. That is through sacrifice. That's one way, is that you could sacrifice something. You will have to give up something to forgive other people. Sometimes it's your ego, right? Or your pride, to set that down and to say, okay, I need to let this thing go. No matter how bad it was, I need to find ways to move beyond it because it's impacting me. To sever something. Sometimes you have to sever ties with people. You might have to say, no, I'm not going to be able to work in this environment anymore, right? Because I need peace. And we saw this happen over the past 3 years where young people in particular have just said, I quit. I am not going to work in a toxic environment. My mental health is much more important. And lastly, it's to suggest something. You might have a really crazy idea. Like I said, for me, I wrote letters to random women. That sounds absolutely like, what? I didn't put my address on it. I mean, but I wanted to put out good into the world, even though so much bad was coming to me. It was a crazy suggestion, a very odd thing to do. But I made the suggestion, well, what if I just do this? And I did it, and it was amazing. So there are suggestions, and you don't have to get permission from anyone to do what you need to do to start healing. So Napoleon was once quoted as saying, it requires more courage to suffer than to die. Boy, that's my story. If you're going to pursue healing, if you're going to pursue forgiveness, you are going to deal with some suffering because you have something you're trying to move past. So that shifts us to our last spot, our last little journey, place, and that's forgiving systems. And I always say, we don't need revolution, we need evolution. We have the tools, we have the concepts, we have wisdom from future generations past, ancestors, however you want to connect with them. You have what your grandmother told you about how she overcame struggles. We have those things. We don't need to burn down, the whole system, if you will. We need to evolve and use what has worked for people in our lifetime. Here's what I know when we think about women in particular, and women groups are my favorite place to connect, probably because I spent such little time connecting throughout my career. And now this is the work I love to do. There is quite a bit of generational trauma that is packed inside of every one of us, of our lived experience, of the women who bore us, of the many ancestral lineages of women, thousands of years before. These are definitely spaces where we can think about looking at what has happened before and what are things that are continuing to happen. So if we look at, I've used Chat GTP, just looked at, 10, things that have been known to plague women throughout history. And you see my list. These are well-known things that have absolutely impacted women over centuries. We know the gender-based violence. All of these things are still showing up in modern day society in one form or another. And what we want to do is we want to think through, how do we move past this trauma? How do we teach that next generation to use forgiveness to move past some of these historical atrocities and things that we too may have engaged in and experienced? Now, the last one here, I put this one here, I added this one, repackaged it, betrayal and heartbreak. That is a common situation when we think through womanhood. And this is not just in your, interpersonal relationships. It's also with agencies and organizations. If I were to ask you, how many of you have had your heart broken inside of an organization? Well, there's 4 of us here and probably 4 hands. This heartbreak, these are things that we do need to think about. How do we forgive? How do we move past what the boss said to you? How do we move past what a coworker what a coworker did? And I thank you. I see Mel saying, yes, I work for the VA, right? I mean, absolutely. This betrayal and heartbreak is what led me to this work. And that's why a bulk of the work is inside of organizations that I do, because there are many, many broken hearts inside of organizations. But what are you going to do? Are you going to take, like here, I use the Lego pieces. If I gave you a Lego piece for every time someone hurt your feelings, for every offense that you have experienced from the day you were born and to today, you probably have enough Legos to build a castle. The question becomes, what are you going to do with that castle? Are you going to let people in and say, hey, this thing too, I experienced it and let me help you? Or are you going to use your castle to keep people out? That's a deeply personal question that every one of us have to think about it. But if we leverage forgiveness as a bridge, then people can get past that moat that we've built in front of our castles. They can get across and all of us can heal. So 10 ways to heal the future, that I offer you as we come to a close. Whoa, this was a fast hour. 10 things for you to think about to heal. We can respect the past, right? We can look back at our past and say, that thing happened. That is a piece of who I was. The question is, what do you do with it today, right? Let people take something with them if you're trying to heal the future. If you're inside of an organization and you're in a leadership position, let them take something with them as you're trying to move them forward, as they're trying to learn to forgive. Let them have a moment in time to acknowledge that was a really tough moment. Okay, you can take them, you can transport the memory, right? But we don't always want to transport the heavy emotions. Approach pain, be a warrior that heals. I mean, that's the new work that I'm doing, is to really think through, how do I help people to engage, understanding their warrior side, experiencing that, but also connecting that you've got to heal. I don't care how tough you are. We look at all these action-packed movies that we love in the West. We can look at Sylvester Stallone, all the really tough characters that we've had. If you look back through those movies, you will still find moments where they realize they too had to heal. Create a culture of grace, right? I do this commonly in the Institute, and I put grace as one of our core values. People need grace. We all need grace. We're fallible. We're human beings. We're going to make mistakes. Despite my best effort to give 100%, right? It doesn't happen. You might get 99.5 on a real good day, right? But I've got to be able to understand perfection is not the goal. It's not. Stop asking what happened, what's wrong with you. That puts people on the defense. And that's for you too, as you're forgiving. Start asking what happened to you. That's a very different question. I want you to resist unforgiveness by any means necessary. It does not benefit you. I have spent weeks teaching, doing week-long courses with people on forgiveness and stepping them through and asking people pointedly, looking them in the eye, and how is this unforgiveness benefiting you? And they struggle to give me a legitimate reason. Oh, I use it as fuel. How's that working out for you? Right? No, it doesn't work for anyone. Aim small. When we were seeing that bow and that arrow, I use a lot of that in methodology of thinking about the bow, about thinking about healing, and the bow is forgiveness and the arrow is what are you sending forward. Aim small, especially if you've been carrying these offenses for a very long time. Start small, one small step. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, one bite at a time. And in conclusion, this is how you can connect with me. Email, LinkedIn. I have a TEDx if you want to know more about forgiveness. That's kind of fun. We move through the music of it. But in conclusion, I would say I'm passionate about this work because the one thing I do know is that if we heal women, that they will heal girls. And so it's about healing the future for me. Lots of stuff in the past I wish I hadn't experienced, wish I had, dealt with much earlier in life, but it's not about me anymore. That's what I do know. I do this work to get me ready and me prepared so that I can help younger women to move through this event of life, with a better ease than what I have. And all of our stories are important for making that happen. There's no way around it. No way around it. If you have questions, you could, stick that in the chat box for me. And I'm going to end with a piece of poetry. I started with one. I'm going to end with one. This is my piece of poetry. It's called I'm Not Mad at Barbie. And it's about women connecting with each other. It says, I'm not mad at Barbie. She's got problems of her own. She peers into a mirror, reflecting an unknown. Girl or woman who's lacking confidence inside her breast. She's motivated by fear and she's scared of life's open book test. Instead of joining forces with me, she competes for a prize, only to see her eyes are set to reach the top first. Only power will quench her thirst. An uphill climb with jagged roads, no one to share the heavy load. I'm not mad at Barbie, not a foe, but a friend. When she tumbles to the bottom, my humble hand I will extend. I plummeted in the past, rushing headfirst off of a cliff, landed on the broad shoulders of countless women who successfully navigated the land of what ifs. What if we never traveled alone? What if we embraced naturally? What if we are stronger together? What if keeping us split apart is a carefully planned strategy? Nope, I'm not mad at Barbie. Thank you for your time and your attention. It's my hope that you've taken away something, at least a motivation to go 25 years, 17 years, and 12 years. Nope, not a day more. I'm going to figure this thing out. Would love to connect with you in the future. So that's where you can find me.
Thank you, Dr. Antoinette. This hour went by very fast. Very great information you shared. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time. And for those of you that are listening live right now, there will be a link sent out with this fantastic presentation here today. So again, thank you all and have a great day.